This is a story about the worst Valentine's Day my husband and I ever had. We didn't really know what to do for Valentine's Day. We originally had plans to go out to our favorite restaurant, but soon realized they had a special prix-fixe menu. We are both picky eaters and were a little nervous about trying new things. In the end, we decided to order takeout and have a relaxed night in, which ended up being perfect as it was storming outside. The only thing was we felt bad about making a delivery driver come out in the horrible weather. We left a large tip as a thank you. When we got a notification that the order had been dropped off, beside our bag of takeout, there was a box of chocolates. We brought it inside, confused. My husband wondered if the delivery driver left it as a thank you for the big tip. We ate our dinner and opened a bottle of wine while we watched a movie. A little after dinner, I was craving something sweet, so we ended up opening the box of chocolates. The problem was they tasted off to me. My husband didn't seem to notice, so he ate them all himself. I was the first one to notice the lights of our next-door neighbor's porch turning on. It shined directly into the living room. Something about our neighbor Jim is he was a nice guy who mainly kept to himself. The only exception is that he liked to bake and would sometimes bring us baked goods that he said he had made too much of. They were always delicious. In many ways, he was a perfect neighbor. He kept to himself except for when he was delivering delicious treats. I wondered aloud what the neighbor was up to, since his lights were usually off by that time of night, only to realize that my husband was fast asleep on the couch. I tried to wake him up to see if he wanted to move to bed, but he was in such a deep sleep that I couldn't rouse him. I checked his vitals and he seemed okay, so I decided to let him sleep while I watched something short. I had just put on a TV show when I heard a door slam outside. For some reason, when I heard footsteps approaching the back door, I put my head down and pretended to be asleep. I could hear what I assumed was my next-door neighbor at the class, and I didn't know what to do if he knocked. There was no reason for me to have the bad feeling that I did, but for some reason I was scared. The footsteps left and I sat up, feeling ridiculous. As I was trying to shake my husband awake, there was a thump from the floor above. My husband wouldn't wake up, and I started to get really worried. I heard the creak of floorboards moving. I floundered around for my cell phone before I remembered I'd left it charging by the bed. Grabbing a fire poker, I made my way through the dark house and up the stairs, cringing at every creak of my footsteps. When I made it to where my phone was supposed to be, it wasn't there. There was a light coming from my closet. When I pulled the door open, I don't know who was more frightened, me or the woman crouched in the dark with my cell phone. She was wearing a tight red dress and held up muddy hands over her face, whispering that she needed help and was trying to call the police. Before I could ask her just what was going on, the familiar sound of my front door opening and closing got my attention. The woman grabbed my wrist and pulled me into the closet, motioning for me to be quiet. I took my phone from her and unlocked it, quickly calling the police. I could feel the woman trembling beside me, and I was so panicked I barely could get my words out to ask for someone to come help us. That's when I heard footsteps entering the bedroom. They walked over to the closet, and the door was yanked open. I blinked in confusion, staring up at my neighbor, Jim. He had a severe expression on his face that was so different than all of the friendly encounters I'd had before. Thinking quickly, I pretended to be relieved to see him. Even though I was terrified, I exclaimed in relief and told Jim that someone was trying to break into the house. I was still on the phone with the police and hoping that they were hearing everything. Jim told me to get out of the closet. He glanced at me and in a stern tone told me I should have eaten the chocolates. Cold spread through me and I grabbed his arm, asking what he meant. Two things happened at once. I heard a thump from downstairs and the woman in the closet swung the fire poker that I had dropped. She hit Jim and he went down. I yelled into the phone that we needed police and ambulance, and I ran downstairs, the woman at my heels. My husband was sprawled in the hallway. He had apparently been trying to reach us, but because of the drugged chocolates, he didn't get far. Turns out, Jim is a serial killer known as the Heart Killer. Every time he brought us baked goods, they were laced with sedatives or sleeping pills to make sure we wouldn't hear the murders. We had mentioned in passing that we had plans out for Valentine's Day, but when we stayed home, we disrupted his plans. Everyone wants to talk about the Heart Killer. People keep asking me details, but I don't want to know what Jim did. Otherwise, I'll think about what was in what he baked for us, and I start feeling sick. I'm going to tell you about how I joined a psychological study, fell in love, and almost died. I was a poor college student when someone handed me a flyer on campus for a sleep study. I've had bad nightmares since childhood, and since the study was paid, I decided to go for it. I showed up at the nondescript building on the flyer and checked in at the front desk. They sent me up an old elevator to the top floor. The bad news was the study I was there for was already full, but they had another study that was also paid. It was on love. I laughed when the woman behind the desk told me about it, thinking it was a joke. See, the date was February 14th. But she was serious, and so I joined Project Cupid. I signed the forms and was led to a circular white room. There was terrible coffee and stale donuts on a table in the middle of the room. I was a broke college student, so I loaded up on the donuts. A guy a few years older than me came over and introduced himself as Tony. We joked about it being Valentine's Day and the idea of a love study when a group of scientists in white lab coats came in. They had us stand in a circle and came by with pills of different colors. I saw Tony take a sky blue pill. When it was my turn, the pill they handed me was a dark red. I hesitated before I swallowed the pill, but everyone else was acting like it was normal. First paid study, one of the scientists asked me with a laugh, and I responded by asking if it was that obvious. I swallowed the pill and watched as everyone took theirs. We were then kept in the room for 30 minutes to see if anyone had a reaction. I wanted to ask what the pill was, but since nobody else seemed concerned, I figured it was fine. There was an older man in the corner who began to sweat. He complained that his stomach was hurting and was quickly led out of the room. Nobody else had any reaction, so after 30 minutes, they opened the door and let us leave one by one, based on who had ingested the pill first. Tony gave me a fist bump on his way out. When it was my turn to leave, I walked through the empty hallway to the old elevator. It wheezed and clanged as it came to collect me. On the way down, the elevator stopped on the 5th floor, and the doors opened to reveal the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She had a large halo of curly hair, and a tight maroon dress hugged her curves. She shot me a seductive smile as she stepped onto the elevator. I never believed in love at first sight, but my heart was racing and I could barely tear my eyes away from her. By the time the elevator hit the ground floor, I had asked for her name and number. She programmed it into my phone with a wink. Jen was everything I'd ever wanted. The next 6 months flew by in a haze of romantic dates and late-night phone calls. I got a part-time job to afford to save up for a ring. Fall semester was coming, and I was contemplating taking some time off of school to spend more time with Jen. We had also talked about me moving into her apartment. I got a random call one day from the sleep study I had originally tried to sign up for. It turned out one of their subjects had dropped out suddenly, and they desperately needed someone to take their place. I was excited, especially when they told me how much the study paid. I did mention that I had taken place in the love study, but that it had been a one-day thing with no follow-up. They said it wasn't a problem, that I could just check in with Project Cupid and then I would be transferred into their study. I didn't even tell Jen I was doing it, wanting to surprise her with the extra money. It would be enough to finally buy the ring I was eyeing. I went back to the plain building and rode up the old elevator. Someone met me in the hallway, seemingly in a rush. They congratulated me on being accepted into the new study and handed me another dark red pill to swallow. I took it, then finally mustered up the courage to ask what it was. The person in the lab coat shrugged and said they didn't have the records in front of them. For all they knew, I was in the placebo group. I laughed and went to check in for the sleep study. 6 months later, and my friend was having a birthday. They were born on February 14th, and whenever they are single, they have a huge party at their favorite restaurant. I showed up dressed in red and black like the invitation said. Imagine my surprise when I bumped into Tony. He was thrilled to see me and we spent a few minutes catching up. Then he introduced me to his fiancée. She was a lovely woman in a pale blue dress that gazed at Tony like he was perfect. It gave me a twinge of something I couldn't place. A flash of red over his shoulder caught my eye. Tony pulled someone closer to make introductions. He said she was the girlfriend of one of his best friends. I heard him say the guy had just gotten accepted into Project Cupid. Nothing he was saying really broke through over the rushing of blood in my ears. I was too distracted by the fact that the woman in front of me was Jen. Jen, who until that moment I had absolutely no recollection of. The day I went to close out Project Cupid and took the second pill was the last time I had even thought about her. Confusion rushed through me. She gave me a smile that didn't fully reach her eyes. Why had she never contacted me? How had I forgotten everything we had? I had loved her and been ready to marry her. Her face started to swim in front of my eyes, and then I realized I was falling. I heard a strange crack and everything went dark. It turns out I fainted and hit the back of my head on a marble table behind me. I was in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks. When I woke up, everyone asked me what happened right before I fainted. I pretended like I couldn't remember. I didn't mention Jen to anyone. Only a handful of my friends had met her, and none of them had ever understood my obsession. When I think back on the 6 months I forgot her, I think about the fact that I never dated anyone else in that time. Even now, I still feel like I'm in love. I just wish I knew who I was in love with. Breaking up with a long-term boyfriend right before Valentine's Day really stinks, but not even for the obvious reasons. The hardest part for me was the pity. My friends felt bad for me and were full of advice. They wanted to set me up on dates. My friend Marlene was the only one I trusted to do it. When she had someone for me to meet, I jumped at the chance. A bit of texting later, and Jonathan seemed nice and funny. I was excited to meet him, but finding time in our busy schedules proved difficult. It turned out the only time that really made sense happened to be Valentine's Day. It was kind of awkward to have a first blind date on Valentine's Day, but we agreed to ignore the weirdness and meet at a fancy restaurant. I got ready in one of my nicest dresses and got to the restaurant early. Despite Marlene telling me that Jonathan was always early like I was, when I was led to the reserved table, it was empty. I got comfortable watching happy and not so happy couples. The server came over. He was a cute younger man with a mop of curly hair and a bright smile. He brought me wine while I waited. And waited. After a bit of time, I started to get worried. The server, whose name was Arnold, kept coming to check on me. I could tell he felt bad for me as the time slipped by and I was still alone. Finally, he talked me into trying an appetizer. As I took my first bite, I got a text from Marlene. Apparently, Jonathan had gotten into a motorcycle accident on his way to the restaurant. He was okay, but she had been called by another friend because there was no way for him to contact me, as his phone was destroyed. I was disappointed and glad Jonathan was okay. A large part of me was just relieved that I hadn't been stood up. Arnold stopped by again when I asked for the check and explained what happened. He got a playful look on his face and asked if I was interested in getting out of there. He was clocking out to go to a party, and I found myself curious about what type of party. The fact that I was dressed up felt like a shame to waste. I decided to take him up on it. Even when he had me meet him in the back alley, I didn't think twice. I felt like it was time to finally take a chance in my life. My ex always gave me a hard time that I wasn't willing to take risks. So I decided to be spontaneous, which is why I jumped on the back of Arnold's motorcycle and let him drive me off into the unknown. I don't know why, but I pictured the party he'd described as taking place in a warehouse or something. Instead, we pulled up to a very nice townhouse. I wasn't sure what to expect, but upon entering, I was shocked to realize the whole building was one beautiful home. There was a crowd of gorgeous people in expensive clothing milling around with drinks. Arnold pulled me towards the kitchen, but when I tried to follow him in, he stopped me. He said staff only, but encouraged me to get a drink and he would find me later. No sooner did I get a champagne than a loud gong sounded, announcing dinner. As I nervously moved with the crowd, Arnold came and found me again. We filed into an enormous dining room full of long, lavishly spread tables. I was having a great time, even if I felt completely out of my element. The first few courses were interesting. Arnold just laughed when I asked what they were. Suddenly, my stomach started hurting. I asked for the bathroom and slipped away. As I was washing my hands, I thought I heard something strange, almost like a scream. My curiosity got the better of me, and I went to look for where the sound came from. I got closer and closer to the kitchens and suddenly smelled blood. Just as I was getting really worried, I got a view into the kitchen and my blood froze. I could see the next course the kitchen staff was preparing. There were trays of human hearts. I was pre-med in college before I became an accountant. I recognized what they were and felt sick. Arnold called my name and I moved as quickly as I could to get away. I snuck to the back of the townhome and ended up in the garage. There was a doggy door, and I wasn't sure if there was going to be a dog on the other end. I pictured it lunging for my face. Then I pictured my heart on a plate in the kitchen. I climbed through. I was almost clear when a hand grabbed my ankle. I kicked out, too scared to even scream. Arnold stuck his head through the doggy door, grinning at me. "Anyone who doesn't eat becomes the next meal," he said, and he bit my leg. I flailed until I was able to kick him in the face and run away. Jonathan asked me to reschedule our date once he recovered, and I agreed. So long as we didn't go back to that original restaurant. The problem is, every time I go out to eat, I get a bad feeling that someone is watching me. The bartender or busboy give me a look, like they know me, like I might be on a menu someday. I met someone in early January at a freezing rooftop party one of my coworkers was throwing. It was a terrible idea for a party, as the temperature was dipping towards freezing, but everyone bundled up and huddled under the heat lamps or near the fire pits that were set up. I ended up talking to a handsome man who lent me his gloves. I'm going to refer to him as Rob for this story, but that's not his real name. It was a magical evening, only tainted slightly by the fact that Rob was only visiting the city. We exchanged info and started dating long distance not long after. On one of our weekly phone chats, Rob mentioned that he was sending me something special for Valentine's Day. I was disappointed because I had hoped that he would come to visit, and I had mentioned coming to visit him. I got over my disappointment though, as I had just been chosen to foster an adorable dog named Rocco. If I wasn't going to be able to see Rob, I at least had a friend to cuddle up with and watch rom-coms. The first time I took Rocco to the dog park, I was on the phone with Rob. He could tell the minute I felt this strange feeling and asked if I was okay. I laughed and told him that I just got the weirdest feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing around, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The second time I got the feeling, I was at a coffee shop. I was doing freelance work and would sometimes take my laptop somewhere just to get out of the house. The same prickling feeling on the back of my neck had me glancing around. I ended up packing up and going home, feeling like I was just being paranoid. The feeling didn't go away though. I would feel it at the grocery store or walking home from the bar. This strange and eerie shiver, like I knew someone was staring at me. But I could never figure out who. The week of Valentine's Day, Rob kind of dropped off the face of the earth. Suddenly, he stopped answering my texts or calls. I even sent a few emails. His social media stopped updating, but I could still see everything, so I wasn't blocked. On Valentine's Day, I was pretty upset. It was one thing to be single or going through a breakup, but I had no idea what was going on with the guy I cared about. I was worried that something bad had happened to him, but the alternative was that he was ghosting me for some reason. So when the doorbell rang the morning of Valentine's Day, I wasn't thinking about the fact that Rob had said he was sending me something. Imagine my surprise when there was a large package on the front porch, wrapped up in red and black wrapping paper, with a black bow on the top. I dragged the box inside, telling Rocco to leave it alone. He wouldn't stop sniffing at it and whining. I tried calling Rob again, but like before, it went straight to voicemail. There really wasn't anything to do but open the package. When I opened it, there was a ton of red and white tissue paper stuffed into the box. I began pulling it out, and Rocco went even crazier. At some point, I realized some of the tissue paper was stained. That's when I got to the gold box nestled in the paper. I immediately got a bad feeling. The box was too large for a necklace or other jewelry. I thought maybe it was a small purse or something. No. Inside was something so much worse. I opened the gold box to reveal a human heart. I screamed and dropped it, and unfortunately, Rocco lunged for it. I managed to get him to drop it after a lot of screaming and yelling, and I locked him in my bedroom. By the time I called the cops, I learned they were already on their way, since the neighbors had heard me screaming. The cops looked at the mangled heart and stained tissue paper and said it was probably a terrible joke. They weren't even sure if it was a human heart. I was pretty sure, but it was pretty messed up from Rocco grabbing it. They took everything as evidence and said they would be in touch. A week went by, and when I called to see if there was any new information, they said they would let me know if they learned anything. I stopped being able to sleep. Anytime I left my house, I thought about the package being placed on my doorstep by someone. I still hadn't heard from Rob, but I kind of just gave up. Things were returning to normal when I scheduled an appointment for a possible adopter for Rocco. I spoke to a nice woman who said that she and her boyfriend were looking to adopt a dog. Rocco sounded perfect for their needs, so I agreed to let her come over to meet him. When the doorbell rang, instead of the woman or a couple on the doorstep, there was a man about my age. He said his girlfriend got sick at the last minute, but he still wanted to meet Rocco. I didn't want Rocco to miss out on getting adopted, so I hesitantly agreed to bring him outside. Rocco immediately hated this guy. He started growling and wouldn't stop. I ended up asking the guy to leave and realized I didn't want to give Rocco to anyone anyway. I canceled all other visits and adopted him myself. 3 months later, I packed up and Rocco and I moved to a new city a few hours away. I had put the negative events behind me. Only today is Valentine's Day. Rocco woke me up with a terrifying low growl. He followed me with all of his hair raised to check the front porch. There we found a new black and red present wrapped up. The police are on the way, but I know what they are going to find inside. It's not enough that I have to live with a broken heart. I have to live with 2 dead ones now, too.